All right, at this point, we've cut some binding strips. Let's take a look at how our mat helps us cut those binding strips. We know our ruler is going to come in to really give us the consistency. Our rotary cutter, our blade fits right inside of here. There's no allowing for the blade to be crooked, whether you're right-handed or left-handed, it goes straight. But let's look at our mat to see how this mat helps us out. When we look at our mat, I've got colors and I've got lines that really come to help me. This long line here, my blue, I'm going to call this the aqua blue. From aqua to aqua, long line to long line is 1 inch. This is my navy blue. From navy to navy is 1 inch. From aqua to navy, I've got 1/2 of an inch. Now quilters live and breathe by 1/4 of an inch. Here's my 1/4 inch seam allowance right there built in, and that 1/4 inch is our second longest line. The longest line, the shortest line, and then I've got my seam allowance 1/4 inch is that second longest line. So visually I have colors, I have lines that will help me out. So when I'm lining things up, I'm using not only these lines to square things up, but if I wanted to square off a block and I wanted to add in a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I would use this line and bring that ruler so that was lined up to there. Again, I would come look up here to see that it was lined up evenly, and I'd look down in front of me. So we've got our lines on our mats. The other thing I really like about this size mat is it's a 38-inch mat. When we look at the numbers that are there, we've got 1 through 36, but you'll notice there's an actual inch on the right side of the 36 and an inch on the left side of the number 1. That means I've got 38 inches. If I'm cutting a yard of fabric on this mat, I don't have to fold that fabric in half like we've had to do with the other mats that are out there. So you lay out your yard of fabric, you've got an additional 2 inches of mat surface, which is really great. Now we're going to move from this and talk about our cutters. Our rotary cutters, I've got a bunch of our rotary cutters out here. Version 1, version 2, version 3. I want to talk about the standard rotary cutter if you've known the Martelli rotary cutter. When we look from the side and we look at this rotary cutter and we look at this rotary cutter, left hand, right hand, you can see that we've got an arrow here, an arrow here, and that piece actually pops out so I can get in and clean this out. I call that version 2 because the very first rotary cutter I ever bought didn't have this little notch right here that pops out and lets me get in and clean that out. So I want to do this real quick so you can see what I mean. I'm using the left-handed cutter, and when I pop this out, that lets me get in and clean out any lint, any batting, polar fleece, those kinds of things. This goes right back in there, and when I line that up, I'm going to lock that in, and I'll hear that click, and I can place this in between. That goes in between the 2 pieces of acrylic there. There's not any washer for me to worry about losing. When I place this screw in the left-handed rotary cutter, I'm following the opposite direction of the arrow. I want to move from the left-handed cutter though to the right-handed cutter because the right-handed cutter is designed a little differently. We normally know righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. When we unscrew this, this is not righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. If you use another rotary cutter, every time you roll forward with that rotary cutter, it's actually loosening up the bolt. This one is keeping that nice and tight. So when I go in and clean that out, you can see same thing as with the left-handed, but I went in the opposite direction. When I bring this back in, you'll see in the arrow, the direction of the arrow, that it's going in the opposite direction. Let's bring that blade cover back. I'm going to bring that screw in, and I'm going in the opposite direction. If you have a hard time getting this out, pay attention to that direction of the arrow because you've probably been tightening up your rotary cutter. So this is our version 2 rotary cutter. People have used our rotary cutters for years, and if they were like me, they might have used it incorrectly. I grabbed my rotary cutter like this the first time I got it, and I used it like this for a while, actually till I met Mrs. Martelli, and she kept putting my finger back over here instead of bringing it down here, and I kept wondering, why is that here? That keeps me cutting straight. The other thing that's different about this is I'm not cutting here. We've been taught to cut down in front of us and to push down. When we do that, the blade isn't nice and straight and hitting that mat. What happens is at an angle, it's actually going to take out a little bit of your mat. We've been taught to do that mostly because we're using those rulers that are acrylic and it takes our body weight. And when I bring this together, that blade is at an angle. It also means that we tend to cut off a little bit. So what I want again is think, shoot from the hip, cut from the hip, your shoulder. When I push forward with this rotary cutter rather than down. If you raise your table up or you sit down at your table, it kind of reinforces that correct body position going forward. What we also did with our rotary cutter to get people to hold the rotary cutter correctly was we changed the design. This is version 2, this is version 3. When we look at the 2, you can see the handles are different. We've made this handle much more substantial. People tend to not only to not put their finger out correctly, but they also had what I call loosey-goosey. They were further back. Even if they had their finger here, right up here, they didn't have a nice tight handle on this. When I grab this new rotary cutter, because this handle is so substantial, it really needs to sit back in the palm of my hand, right kind of in this crease area. There's a place for your thumb to go, and your pointer finger goes right here. Again, I'd have a hard time having a loose grip on there. When I cut here versus where I cut here, you can see the body difference, this different position, ergonomics. We talk a lot about ergonomics. So body position here rather than this way. Now, the other thing that happened with our rotary cutters is this spring, when people pushed down and pushed forward and pushed hard, this spring would go flying. If you've ever had a spring fly off, we'll send you another. We'll tell you how to put it back on there. But we've also, on this new rotary cutter, is made that spring a little bit tighter. It doesn't open up in the same way that our other rotary cutter opens up. I'll show you how to open that in just a minute. This is our 45 millimeter. This is our 60 millimeter. 60 millimeter blade means that it's the same design basically when we look at our two rotary cutters, but when we look at this from the side, I've got a much more substantial blade. This one is going to be used when you're cutting more fabric, a lot more fabric, when this is blue jean, when this is polar fleece, when this is anything that has a whole lot of weight to it. If you're doing a high loft batting and you want to square off your quilt, this is a great one for you to use. I love the 60 millimeter when I'm doing a lot of charity projects, when I'm doing a whole lot of work, because I can get through more fabric quicker and easier. But the 45 is good enough for most of the projects that you're going to be doing. So you can make the decision. If you love a rotary cutter, hey, I recommend both. I've got several of both the right hand and left hand. All right, I want to talk about the blades. Our 45 millimeter blade is standard. You can use anybody's blades. There's a study that was done on blades. They look at the sharpest, longest lasting, most durable, the cheapest. Ours always comes in as the best blade out there. So why would you buy anybody else's blade? If it's Friday night, Sunday night, and you're working on a project and you've got to get a blade because you dropped this and that blade hit the floor, if you dropped it when it was open and that blade hit the floor, or you hit a pin, you need a new blade. If you want to run to Walmart, pick up a blade that has a circle, not the ones with the notches. The notches are going to eat away at this bolt, and that invalidates your warranty. We want you to have success with this. We want you to be able to say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It cuts through more fabric. If you've ever gotten your hands on these at a show, and we've had you cut through 32 layers of fabric, you'll know how great these are for you to be able to cut through a whole lot of fabric. All right, if you know our rotary cutter and you have version 1 or version 2, then you know you simply roll forward and you hear that click, and that exposes the blade. We roll that forward, the blade's ready to cut, and now I want to show you how to close this. When you close, I'm going to leave my pointer finger here, and we're going to take our middle finger. I'm looking at the tip past the tip of my red, and when I flick that down, roll forward, flick, and that closes that. We've always told people in the past, do this 20 or so times. What that will do is, in your brain, you're going to be burning, firing synapses, so that you've got that basically burned into your brain to always keep this closed. I mentioned this is the sharpest blade that's out there, so we don't want to leave that open. This, once this blade guard is here, it's locked in place. If you drop this, it doesn't open up like those spring-loaded cutters do. This is locked, so we always want to leave it in the lock position. The right-handed cutter, again, when you roll forward, let me get it in body position. When I roll forward, you hear that click, and you flick to close. Again, pointer finger is past, and then we flick. So that's how this one does. And you can see with me not being right-handed, the left-handed one is more comfortable for me. The right-handed cutter, our new right-handed cutter, is version 3. It doesn't roll open. You can see I'm trying to roll that open, and even if I were right-handed and this were comfortable for me, it's not going to roll open. We've changed that spring so it's nice and tight. So here we've given you a strip of the blue, and when I roll forward here, you'll hear that click. And we're ready now to go cut our fabric. We close it in the same way that you use the other rotary cutter and close, but now when you open it, you can roll forward. Or you can simply bring the guard back and you're ready to cut. Now let's talk ergonomics. Again, when I look at this blade here versus the blade here. When I look at this blade here versus the blade here. You can see this blade, where it contacts with the mat, if I were to cut pushing down, if my table were lower and I put a lot of pressure down, I could actually take out part of the mat. If I cut here and then I cut a little bit further away, or even cut this way, you could actually take out a little triangle piece of your mat. You may have done that before. If you've done that before, you can buy mat smoothers and smooth them out, but what I want you to think about is ergonomically, where your body should be, where your cutter should be. You can move your arm or you can move your body. If I'm here, I can move my body over here, or I can move my hand over here, depending on where my fabric is. So we want to shoot from the hip, cut from the hip. Think about cutting forward here. When I cut forward, not only do I want to cut straight, but I also want to, with this, not going here, not going here. We're going to look at this in the example of flying a plane. I want you to think about flying a plane. As you fly a plane, you want to fly at a consistent altitude. If you're going like this, let's take a look from the side, this would be landing the plane. This would be taking off. So when we look at this from the side, I want to see that this is flat and even, straight with this mat. So when we roll forward, you can see this angle versus this versus this. When we're talking about cutting at an angle, and if we relate that to flying a plane, if you're flying a plane, you're going to always be going in a circle if you're cutting this way. If you're cutting in this way, you're always going to be cutting or flying in a circle that way, which is fine if you want to do curves. The rotary cutter does a beautiful job of cutting curves and doing those angles, and you notice I'm rolling backwards. This is a beautiful rotary cutter for cutting forward and cutting backwards. But if I'm trying to cut straight, I want to cut here, and I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do this, and don't want to do this. If we take the analogy of pushing a car, your car has stalled on the side of the road, you don't push down, you push forward. Hot Wheels, those little zoom cars, we're pushing forward. We're not pushing down, we're pushing forward. So whatever analogy you like, I want you to think about looking at your rotary cutter. If you're not having success with our rotary cutter, you should be able to cut through 64 layers of fabric, 32 layers of fabric without any real pressure. If you're not having that success where you're cutting every single layer of fabric consistently, get somebody to watch you. Have them watch this part of the video. We also have another video that Scott does. David, I think, has done a video on this too as well. Have them watch the video and then have them watch you. Or get a mirror out. Put that mirror near you and watch your hand. If you're doing this, if you're doing this, do you see even my wrist here versus down? I want you to go nice and straight. If you're doing this, if you're doing this, all of those things impact your success with your cutter. And what are we trying to do? Accuracy, consistency, making it beautiful, making it faster and easier. I don't want the stress, I don't want all of that pain, but I also want to have what you cut being perfect and consistent. One more thing I want to talk about with our rotary cutters. I mentioned the 45 millimeter, and I mentioned that there's been studies done on blades. The 45 millimeters are standard, so you can run out to Walmart if you're in a pinch and you need a blade. I recommend you pick up the phone and call us. If you see us at a show, pick up a 5-pack of blades. They're cheap, so it's a great way for you to have extra blades. But if you're in a pinch, the 45s, you can use anybody's blades that are circular. 60s, not so. 60s, whether you buy a Fiskars, an Olfa, or whoever, you have to buy their blades from that point on. This blade, this is our 60 millimeter blade, and this 60 millimeter blade is made for Martelli. If you buy a Fiskars, you've got to buy Fiskars blades. If you buy an Olfa, you've got to buy an Olfa set of blades. Same thing with Martelli. Also, you'll notice, I don't know if you can see, but I can feel there's oil on here. There's supposed to be oil on here when the blades come in the package. Before you get started cutting your fabric, though, wipe off that blade, because if you're working with some really nice fabrics where that's going to show, I don't know if you can see, but my fingers are all oily. They're supposed to be that way, but we don't want them that way with our fabric. So 60s, 45s, version 1, version 2, version 3. Hopefully this is logical. And if you have any questions, you can always contact the Martellis or look at our website. Thanks.